revolutionary movements do not arise for no reason at all. There are always real injustices that fuel people's desires for revolution. And Dreyer talks about this as he, had a conversation with somebody and just asked the question, well, how did the Bolsheviks' message even, how is this plausible? How is this influential upon people? It seems so patently absurd when you are just kind of reading back into history in our context today. What made this attractive to people? Was it just something, say, that was pushed top down and that was it? Well, that's not how this works. Yes, ideas do tend to start from the top. And it is true that culture does largely change in a top-down way. We talked about James Davidson Hunter's book on this subject on other podcasts in the past. But it is true that when you're talking about the elites, whether it's the intellectual elite or the political elite, they often are the ones that start a revolution or revolutionary ideas. And that's not usually the people at the top of the chain, because the people at the top of the chain like their power. They're in a good position. They don't want it. But it's people that are in enough of a position of power to have influence, but they are not the elite of the elites. It does take those people to start a revolution that's going to be successful, at least. But it does also have to come down to the average person and speak to the average person's sensibilities. You have to get people on your side in order to be successful, at least to some extent. And so the question is, well, why was the Bolshevik Revolution, why would this be attractive? And the reality is there were profound inequalities. Now, when you look at communism, in the rise of communist movements and Marxism more generally, Marxism speaks to the reality of oppression. And, as Marx writes himself, Marx and Engels in the Communist Manifesto write about, the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. You have this kind of ruling class that is just using the lower classes for the sake of their labor and benefiting off of them. I think of the old black and white silent film Metropolis. If you've never seen that, I highly recommend it. It's a really powerful film. But where you have basically this metropolis where these people are just working like crazy all this time, and then as you kind of go up the layers in the society, you find these upper class elites just kind of living off of luxury that the people below them are producing. And there's of course truth to that. There's truth to the fact that people on the top will abuse power and do abuse their power. That is a reality that Scripture warns about repeatedly. I mean, when the Israelites say that they want kings, they demand a king, and God is pretty explicit to the Israelites to say, "You sure you want a king?" They're gonna exploit you. The kings are going to try to get a bunch of horses and a bunch of wives and exploit workers, and this is what people do when they are in positions of power because people are sinful. And Marxism says, well, it speaks to a real problem, which is a problem of any human society, but it comes at that problem from a secular perspective rather than a Christian one. So Marxism sees religion as the opium of the masses, as is often said, that kind of keeps the masses quiet and keeps them in line, and says, well, established political order is not anything you can't do anything about that. So the upper classes basically just create and use religion as a way to oppress people. And so within then the Marxist system, there is no real sense of sin. There is no real sense of especially individual sin or original sin. And there is a kind of utopian vision that Marxist societies have. And so it has its own eschatology. Now, every system of belief has its own eschatology. By eschatology, we mean last things. What is the goal? What is the goal that you are looking for? People are oriented toward finding purpose, and that doesn't just mean purpose in their individual selves. We do have that, certainly, but we are also oriented toward finding broader purpose in history. We look to patterns in history. We look for progress in history because we need to be part of something bigger than ourselves, and we want to see that things are reaching towards some kind of a goal. This is just how we're oriented as creatures. So if you don't do this in terms of Christianity or any other religious context, you're going to create some other kind of notion of progress or eschatology. What is the goal? What are we aiming toward? Now, in an era where Hegel's idealism becomes popular, philosophers start thinking about a lot about historical progress. They start thinking about truth in terms of process, and things are essentially getting better. And Hegel's an idealist, which means that he sees this more in the realm of ideas. He talks about this world spirit that's growing and increasing, and we're thinking of, as opposed to the classical philosophers, if you look at someone like Plato, when you're talking about truth, you're speaking largely about the realm of ideas, and these are kind of static ideas. They stay the same. So a classical doctrine of God, for example, will say that God's being is unchanging. It's immutable. So in a context of divine immutability, that which is greatest is that which is unchangeable. With Hegel, he still sees truth really as the realm of ideas. That is the ultimate reality. But we are growing toward truth. Right? We are increasing. So we're not looking at something that is just statically always true. We are looking at the process of becoming rather than the process of being. Now, this debate between being and becoming is something that goes back to the ancient Greek philosophers. But we're looking at becoming rather than being as the source of truth. So you have this notion of progress throughout history. Now, Hegel's largely talking about progress of ideas. So he's not a communist. This comes later. He's talking about the history of ideas, and Hegel largely even sees himself kind of as the height of all progress of philosophy. He's like the final great philosopher in his view. Which tells you a bit about his personality and how he thought about himself. But with Marx, what you get is a materialist form of Hegel's philosophy, meaning that he grabs onto Hegel's notion of becoming and progress, but he doesn't believe in the immaterial. He believes in just the material physical world. Now, if that's the case, where does progress come from? Where is this growth? It's not in the realm of ideas, but it's here concretely in human societies. So you get this utopian kind of vision, this notion that we can equalize all people's social status. We can destroy that ruling class that is oppressing people. That's really the problem with the world. And we can get rid of private property. And once we do that, now we can create this vision of people that they're all provided for. Everybody has, the same amount of wealth. We share. We don't hoard wealth for ourselves as the bourgeoisie does. And, it's a nice vision, theoretically. It doesn't work in practicality, because every time that Marxism has been tried, it doesn't work. Because, well, how do you make everybody equal? Now, historically, and this is Leninism, is a term to speak about the imposition of Marxism in a political sphere. So Marxism is really just this kind of theoretical idea. Leninism is, how do we put this actually in practice? Well, the way that you make everyone equal is by putting someone into power that can now force everyone to be equal. And what have you done? All you've done is now you've taken oppression from the bourgeoisie, and I'm not saying that that's not real, because it is. There absolutely is oppression from the rich to the poor. That's just an obvious fact of history, and of just like open your eyes and look around at any community you live in. It's obvious. But now you've changed the bourgeoisie so that now you have a new bourgeoisie, which is you have someone supposedly from the proletariat taking over and starting a political revolution, and now they're coming to power, and now they're exerting their power to make sure everyone is equal. Clearly, you haven't actually solved the problem, because now you have just replaced one bourgeoisie for a different bourgeoisie, one that is revolutionary and not tied at all to history, and the conditions tend to get worse every single time that it has actually occurred in history. And I know there's the saying that real communism has never really been tried, and we still have to try it because it wasn't real communism. Now, I had someone challenge me on that. And say, no, Marxists really say that real communism hasn't been tried. And I don't know. I've heard it from Marxists multiple times. So, I don't know who I'm talking to, but apparently people that still use that kind of language. So what happens then is you have this new oppressive ruling class, but the new oppressive ruling class claims that they are working for the good of the oppressed class or the workers. But they're really just abusing the workers even more than they were being abused in the first place.